This is Politically Deconstructing with Cass and my lovely co-host, Lady Google. Today we're going to be talking to Law of the Wild. You've seen him on Jake Tapper. You've seen him on the Town Hall with Anderson Cooper. You've seen him on BBC, and you have seen him on MSNBC, along with various local media. So today we're going to be talking about the shooting of Alex Preddy, and a lot of what Law brings to the table is his expertise not only in Minnesota gun law, but his legal expertise as well. He's one of our favorite public defenders here on TikTok, and we're just going to have fun with it. Let's do a little bit of what has been going on since the last time we met. We do know that the unaliving of Alex Preddy happened. We had some video that I think Googs and I agree, and she can speak to this more, doesn't really lead you down the hill that what occurred was Preddy's fault.
What the fuck is wrong with you? The fuck, people? The fuck is wrong with you? Honestly.
What is your take?
I mean, I saw a guy recording, which is, First Amendment right. He was out there in the streets, yes, recording an altercation. And I didn't see him engage the actual officers until they shoved a woman to the ground. And even then, I didn't really see him engage the officers. I saw him put himself in between them and try and help her up, at which point he was swarmed and held to the ground and disarmed and then unalived.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we were pretty much on pretty much the same page with everything that we saw. But what we've seen since we last gathered here, folks, for our last podcast has been straight wild. First, we have Cash Patel, Christy Nome, all the usual suspects, Stephen Miller, coming out of the admin. He's a domestic terrorist. He is he tried to hurt these officers and they were just essentially standing their ground.
Who came with weapons and ammunition to stop a law enforcement operation of federal law enforcement officers committed an act of domestic terrorism.
We heard the ringer from them. And then, like magic, Daddy Trump called them all into the principal's office and they got a little spanking. And then we've seen the Trump administration sort of kind of wiffle waffle their way through this, easing back, pulling the sort of Nome effect in Minnesota out. Not completely. There's still ICE agents there. I don't want to set that up wrong. But Tom Homan expressed that they were going to go after criminals more, make sure they're dealing with people as they're leaving the jails versus rounding people up on the streets. Essentially, less people in the streets, more people, more ICE officers doing detention facility duty, which I suppose it is somewhat of a relief for citizens. But again, is it what we want? Is this where it should be going? And I think I'm sorry, Law is ready to go, buddy. How are you today?
Hanging in there. Just got done with arraignments.
Can you tell us about some of the specific firearms cases you've been involved in?
Yeah, so on behalf of my clients, we worked on a lawsuit. Basically, Minnesota kind of set an arbitrary age of 21 for people to get their permits to carry. My clients had members that were over 18 and but not yet 21 who weren't able to get their permits to carry. Some of them had served in the military. Some of them worked security jobs and things like that. They're good enough to be drafted into the Army. They're good enough to vote. They're good enough to buy a home. They're good enough to enter into contracts, but weren't able to exercise their Second Amendment right. Took that case and won at the district court level in Minnesota. One at the Eighth Circuit, actually twice. Keith Ellison appealed and then went en banc, and we won there again. And then he appealed up to the Supreme Court. We wrote our response there, and Supreme Court declined to take up the case. So we ultimately won there. And then more recently, I've been involved with litigation against the city of St. Paul. They passed an ordinance that's in violation of state law. Basically, banning carry in public spaces, banning certain types of firearms, magazine limits. And, those are arguments for the legislature under Minnesota law. They're not arguments that cities can have. The reason is that if you have a permit to carry and you're traveling through a city, you should have a reasonable expectation that when you're traveling around the state, you're abiding by the same rules. So the state preempts local units of government for being able to pass their own laws. And so in this case, um, the issue is that they passed their own laws in violation of a state law that says that they couldn't. So that litigation's ongoing.
Sure. I want to throw in one more question, then I want to let you answer and throw it off to Lady Google for some of the next ones. So when I was in Minnesota, you were hot and heavy with the interviews. I know you've done it. It has to be like 40 at this point recently about the Alex Preddy shooting. Do you have any thoughts on that? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was on BBC Worldwide this morning at bright and early at 6 a.m. But so that was interview number 33. Very interesting. Dutch media, German. And it was interesting, though. I did Cass is aware of this, that all of them, they wanted to meet at a gun range. So some of them were kind of surprised that like you have to travel like 30 minutes outside of Minneapolis to get to the closest gun range. I feel like they think that there's like one on every street corner or something like that. But yeah, that was interesting. Plus, yeah, Jake Tapper, MS Now, the 13th Hour. I was participated in a CNN town hall that they had here in Minneapolis. They invited me to attend there. Got to see Keith Ellison again. Nice not seeing him in a courtroom when I'm suing him. So that was although he was just as pleased to see me there.
He looked like it. I saw the picture.
I was gonna be like, was he happy to see you not suing him?
Yeah, not so much. No, I did give him praise for the work that he's doing in the courts to try to get transparency in the investigation of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. So it wasn't all criticism, but yeah, and then lots of local and national media, CBS, across the country. Oddly, no Fox News. They didn't want to talk to me, but
I disagree. I saw you on a local Fox News station.
No, I think national is what he maybe said.
Yeah.
Like I saw you on a local one.
The local stations are pretty far disconnected from the Fox National. Yeah.
It's amazing they don't want to talk to you on Fox. It's almost like they don't want to change their narrative.
Yep, and when they don't know what they're talking about and they just want to, and they feel like their job is to reinforce the messaging from the administration, it's a little difficult. But oddly enough, the messaging from the administration keeps changing. So I don't watch Fox News. So I'm curious, which narrative are they going with? Are they sticking with the original, or are they going like with the retconned one where they have to now twist it to where, okay, well, maybe Border Patrol wasn't acting within the scope of their use of force orders?
Can you tell us a little bit about what you saw when you reviewed the Alex Preddy shooting, and more to that, the Renee Good? Can you tell us your thoughts on that, how that would proceed forward? I think a lot of people have questions on this, and there's so much misinformation out there that it's very hard to sort of dissect what's going to happen moving forward. I know I'm covering the TRO on evidence in Minnesota and it not being, but I think you're much better to give a little bit of a synopsis on this and just what you saw and your feelings on essentially how they're going to sort of maybe have some accountability here, if that's even a possibility.
So I do have to be careful here. I am an officer of the court, so I am bound by Minnesota's rules of ethics as far as, the words that I use. So and this is a case that's going to be happening in my area, so I need to be I'm not going to say that it was murder, that it was completely justified. I'm going to lay out the facts and people can draw their own conclusions, and there's a lot that we don't know specifically about officer mentality, because that comes into effect with these decisions, is that you can have an unjustified shooting that's ruled justified because of a reasonable mistake. That's something that can happen and something that could potentially happen here. Starting with the Renee Good, there's a few tactical errors that the officer made. And with any officer use of force, anytime an officer use of force, it's largely governed by a case called Graham versus Connor. And the Graham versus Connor and its progeny say that the officer's use of force has to both be objectively reasonable, meaning a similar officer in a similar situation would have reacted in a similar way. And then it has to be based on a totality of the circumstances. You can't just freeze frame at one particular second and say, okay, it's justified here or it's unjustified here. You have to look at everything that was leading up, which includes both the recipient of the force, their conduct, as well as the officer's conduct leading up to it. That all factors into the totality of the circumstances. For Renee's good, some things that I think will be challenging to the officer's legal use of force are: one, he was outside of his policy by getting in the path of a moving vehicle. Now, while that's not legally significant as far as breaking a policy doesn't mean you're guilty of a crime. It is important as far as the analysis on the objective reasonableness of the officer's actions. Policies can serve as a useful guide as to what we expect a reasonable officer to do. A reasonable officer is going to follow their policies. So if an officer isn't following their policies, there's an argument that they're acting unreasonable. So getting in the path of a moving vehicle could be argued that it's not reasonable. And then as far as the decision to plant his feet and draw the firearm when he could have gotten out of the way, is that something that a reasonable officer in that situation would have done? And a couple of things with that is what was his mindset there? Was his mindset, oh crap, I think I'm about to die? That may be something that he could bring up as a defense. Is there if his mindset was, oh my god, this bitch is going to get away, that's not a justified use of force.
Now, again, this is just from my viewing the video. She put that vehicle in reverse first. And in my estimation of what I saw, he actually stepped forward towards the vehicle that was going in reverse. So it wasn't necessarily that he like planted his feet in front of a moving vehicle. In my opinion, he like stepped towards a reversing vehicle, which further put him in the way of the vehicle instead of using that time to step out of the way.
Yeah, decreasing your distance from the vehicle, it would arguably be an unreasonable thing for an officer to do. So that factors into it. All of this matters because an officer's use of force, if they create the situation that necessitated the use of force, that's not a justified use of force.
Protocol would dictate that they attempt to de-escalate first, correct?
Yeah, I mean that's generally the orders, is that a use of force is deadly force is always supposed to be a last resort. It's after you've exhausted every other potential option. Now that the potential options can be very minimal, between in 1 to 2 seconds that you have to make a decision to use deadly force. But one of those options is to get out of the way, and he made the decision to not get out of the way and to draw his firearm. So that's something that would be subject to review. And then there's the issue with also that shooting a driver does not stop the vehicle. We, of course, saw that as the vehicle, after Renee was shot, that the vehicle sped off, presumably because, foot goes against the accelerator when you're shot and your body's limp and unresponsive. That doesn't stop the vehicle. It doesn't end the threat. So that's part of the reason why it's in the policy, is because shooting a driver doesn't necessarily end whatever threat the vehicle posed. And then finally, there's a second and third shot that clearly happened from the side driver's window after the officer was clearly out of the path of the vehicle. Some people point to the direction of the tires. From the officer's vantage point, if you were to stand 2 feet in front of your vehicle, you may not be able to see which way the tires are pointed when you're looking down. So some people point to that. Some people point to the fact that the steering wheel was turned all the way to the right. And these are the questions that a defendant presumably has to answer to in a criminal case. Is they can either testify, or the attorneys can attempt to present evidence that wasn't clearly noticeable to him.
Well, one thing I was curious about, if you could speak to this, and this was my understanding of it, but I want to make sure I'm correct. The simple act of fleeing alone isn't a justification for deadly force. Am I correct in that, or have I misunderstood it?
No, that's correct. That comes from a case called Tennessee versus Garner, and that case says that deadly force against a fleeing felon can only be used if the officers have a reasonable belief that there is imminent, that the felon, if they were allowed to flee, was going to cause imminent death or bodily harm. So the situation like this is, you've got a person that's got a bomb 10 feet away, and if they're running towards the bomb, they're a fleeing felon, but you shoot them in order to stop the greater harm. But the courts have held that the fear has to be imminent. It can't be speculative. So even if you have somebody who's you believe is a suspect for unaliving, You can't just shoot them merely because they're running away because they might unalive again. That's too much speculation. You have to have a reasonable belief that there's imminent, meaning immediate bodily harm that's going to happen to somebody. So yeah, the type of situation, running for a bomb, or lunging towards another victim, or trying to access a weapon, those are the times where you can shoot an unarmed person, but not in this situation.
I have like a real basic question. We were talking about how maybe the administration has been very quick to mislabel what has happened in both instances. And I just have like a basic, I guess, like non-legal or dumb question. Are there any policies in place to prevent the mischaracterization of an individual as a domestic terrorist without any evidence? Is there any policy that would prevent that
Yeah,
under normal circumstances?
there's general policies, like they violated the policies by posting photos of the arrestees, from the church incident and the subsequent uh, uh, I guess riot, or unlawful assembly, or whatever they want to call it, that happened. That's a violation of standards. But when the executive writes the standards, the executive can choose to break them. There's not necessarily a law, absent some sort of tort claims act, which we can talk about later, how that's a whole mess, because that ties into both the Pretty and the Good cases.
So I guess at this point now, like, we would move on to what happened with Preddy. And I think Preddy, at least in my estimation, and I'm not saying this is yours because I want to be careful, because I know it's hard with you being an officer of the court to sort of like make this a statement, but at least in my estimation, the cases were, I felt, more distinguishable. With Renee Good, it was a little bit more of muddy water. Now, certainly I had my own opinions on it, and I'll be clear about that, and you can look at my other page to find those out. However, with Alex Preddy, it very much appeared to be, he was disarmed and they unalived him, TikTok friendly terms here. So I am curious your thoughts on what you saw, for what you can say, again, respecting that I know where you're at. And then I'd like to move into some of the administrative statements on gun law in Minnesota, because I know that's your bread and butter. So what were your thoughts on Alex Preddy?
Yeah, I mean that. So my first exposure to the Preddy shooting was when I woke up and I saw the DHS statement that came across my Twitter feed. And immediately, I've seen that DHS has not been reliable narrators. Yeah, in these cases, I look at some of the arrest things that they post, and they say a violent domestic abuser was taken off the streets, and I go and I look up the actual case, and the case turns out that it was a verbal argument between a brother and between two brothers, and he made a threat, a verbal threat. That's they want you to portray that this guy is essentially a wife abuser, but that's not what the case shows. So I haven't been trusting DHS to be a reliable narrator. But even the language that they chose in their initial statement, they said that that agents shot somebody who was approaching them with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, which is nothing special. But the word approaching them, I was like, my first thought was, okay, you didn't say pointing, you didn't say drawing, you didn't say firing, you said approaching. So my immediate mind was he just carrying? Like, what was he just carrying a firearm and walking towards you? So I knew that I needed to see the video, and I was able to find the first video shot from the donut shop right there. And as I looked through that, as I frequently do, I go frame by frame. I go do that with body cameras with my clients. I'm somewhat of an expert of breaking down and trying to assess a situation frame by frame. And I'm looking and I'm like, wait, that agent just came out with a firearm that he didn't have before. And at no point did I see him draw a firearm. I saw him backing away towards the sidewalk. I saw a Border Patrol agent come towards him, violently shove a woman, push another woman. Alex turns towards him and holds his hands out, maybe makes contact with his waist. That's unclear. If it was just passive contact, not anything that would constitute
incidental.
Yeah, an affirmative assault. And then he's dragged to the ground. And then as more angles came out, it became very clear that they had no idea he had a firearm at all until he was surrounded by 6 agents that were just utterly uncoordinated. And when I was in law enforcement, we trained to work in teams. If you got a partner, you tell your partner what to do. You know what you're going to do. When you've got a squad of 4 people, you got one person telling grab his arms, you grab his feet. I'm going to hold his midsection down. And it works really well. If you got one officer pushing your midsection down, another one pulls your feet out, and then you got another officer grabbing your arms, you're not going anywhere. That's a kind of coordinated, you could do this with 2 officers. You could do it with 1. It's a little bit scrappy with 3. Then you just need, if you got more people, they just stand back and wait to help. Here you had a bunch of officers with uncoordinated actions, beating, grabbing, punching, kicking. And then all of a sudden, some agent in a gray coat comes up out of nowhere, decides to grab his gun, and then walks away. I don't hear him saying firearm secured, none of those types of things that you would do to alert the other agents. And then a second later, Preddy is shot. Keep in mind, he had been pepper sprayed just before this, and the effective time that pepper spray takes to kick in is about 15 to 30 seconds. It can be a little bit longer in cold weather. And so it would have been kicking in right as, he would have been getting that searing pain. I've been pepper sprayed multiple times. That searing pain that just makes you want to grab your face and wipe it off of your eyes. And then on top of getting hit in the head with a can of pepper spray and the other, other hits that he was taking, the courts have held numerous times, especially twice here in the Eighth Circuit, that when a suspect is reacting to pain and stimuli, that it's not resisting. If their body is having a physiological reaction to pain, that means that they may curl up, they may shield themselves. Those actions aren't resisting, and it certainly doesn't warrant use of force. In this situation, it's unclear where the first shot came from. There's 2 plausible theories. My leading theory is that it came from a negligent discharge from the officer in the gray jacket as he was walking away. Just because of the timing and what I see in the video. A shot fires and he kind of looks back, which some people say, well, he looked away. When adrenaline's pumping, and especially when you get echoes off of buildings like that, a shot sounding like that can bounce around from anywhere. So, we really don't have any conclusions. If they would just, release the evidence of which guns were fired and by who and how many shots were missing, this would be a really quick analysis. I'm either right or wrong. And the New York Times posted a video, which I also think is really compelling, that the first shot came from one of the officers who actually, had, Preddy was disarmed right in front of his eyes. And so all of that calls into question the use of force. Officers can only use deadly force if there is an imminent fear of death or great bodily harm to themselves or another. So they would have to be able to articulate what was the imminent fear of death or great bodily harm that a disarmed person could pose. And I don't think that they can do that. So I think that's challenging. And one other thing about the officer training is the former commander of Border Patrol came out and has spoken that Border Patrol is not trained for this. Border Patrol, they're used to working solo. They work on a 50 or 100-mile stretch of border that they cover every day, and they don't have a partner. So they're not used to working with other agents in some sort of kind of coordinated activity like I was, trained for as a police officer to do, and as police officers here are trained to do. They're basically a bunch of solo acts. And secondarily, their operational orders were only to create a physical barrier between the ICE teams that were conducting arrest actions and any public or demonstrators. Basically, they were supposed to be human police tape and stop anybody from approaching the ICE officers who were doing their job. They had no engagement rules that told them that they could chase down, and none that actually said that they could make arrests. Now, they do have some inherent authority to make arrests under federal statutes, but these officers, as they approached and tried to detain Preddy, were acting outside of their rules of engagement.
I just had a basic question. Do you believe that non-lethal tools were appropriately used before this took place, before use of force took place?
No, I don't think anything about the use of force was appropriate based off of my training and experience. There's something called a use of force continuum, and you start at verbal commands, and then you move into and if they're coming back with passive resistance, that's what the verbal commands are for. If they're passively resisting, at no point did I ever hear anybody tell Alex Preddy that he was under arrest. And under Minnesota law, if this was a Minnesota officer, that would be a violation of the law. An officer has to articulate that the person is under arrest, if reasonable, and it would have been reasonable here. You say you're under arrest, put your hands up or put your hands behind your back. Once you tell them you're under arrest, they are on notice that any further action that they take is resisting arrest. And telling somebody that, more often than not, not every time, but more often than not, when somebody finds that hears that they're under arrest, they'll comply. They might give you a verbal ration of shit, but they're not going to resist you because they know that at the end of the day, no matter what they do, they're ending up in a cop car and they're going to jail. So once you articulate that they're under arrest, that shifts the dynamics. I never heard that at all from here. So the verbal commands were absolutely absent, except I did hear one at the very beginning, get back, and guess what? He got back. He started walking back towards the sidewalk. And then from there, you have restraints that you can do, pressure points, things like that. Then it can go to chemical irritants. And sometimes if restraints aren't practical, those are kind of at the same level. And then at the top of the pyramid is deadly force, and that's only the last resort.
There was something I'm wondering about. We have, and I'm using it as a clarification point. Again, I have my own sort of analysis on it, but I'm really curious to hear from you. A lot of people are talking about this new video that emerged 11 days prior to this shooting about Alex Preddy. Now, in my opinion, it's irrelevant because it's not the same set of circumstances. It's also about a minute long. There's no lead up. There's nothing telling us what is actually occurring to lead to these actions in the video. But a lot of the sentiment is, oh, well, this is his state of mind. He's aggressive, et cetera, et cetera. But also the reverse can be true, that this could be, a compelling reason for them to target him. And, that's sort of up in the air. But I am curious about this because my whole line on the video is that even if they were going to try to admit this into court, that it would be very prejudicial, less probative, very prejudicial against Alex Preddy's state of mind and things like that. I'm curious your thoughts on this video, or if you've even seen it.
100% that's not coming into any court case. It's something that happened 10 days before, unless it is the same victim, literally the same exact person, is going to be utterly irrelevant. So, and here you had, those were ICE agents that he, kicked the vehicle of, and he was shot by Border Patrol. So there's no indication that any persons here were connected. Now, I do believe, based on that video, that Alex Preddy committed a felony, criminal damage to property, and and likely some federal felonies as well. But they didn't arrest him; they didn't charge him. So it's utterly irrelevant to anything that happened. He didn't lose his permit to carry rights. And any attempt to try to impugn some sort of character or mindset, we don't know what happened, what set him off in that particular instance, and we're never going to know. But to try to say that here is indicative of his character is just utterly ridiculous. We don't know those facts and circumstances, and there's no court in this country that's going to allow that kind of evidence to come in, if he were, somehow on trial for something else.
Well, that's something that's bothered me about sort of this video coming out. And I know that I've sent you a few choice videos that people have made about this, so you know exactly what I'm talking about. I don't need to go into that further. But of people saying he shouldn't be allowed to have a permit to carry. They're not referencing that, he committed a felony. They're just saying that because his character says XYZ in this 1 minute clip, that somehow he shouldn't be allowed to have a firearm. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're allowed to have a firearm until you have a felony conviction or you become otherwise prohibited. So
thank you.
There's nothing in there that would have stopped him until he was actually convicted.
Gotcha.
Can I also just point out, I don't know if anybody else noticed, but he was carrying in the time of the 11 days prior. You can see it in his waistband when he's being shoved by the ICE agent after committing an actual property damage violent offense. It's clearly visible in his waistband. Mm-hmm. And that didn't escalate the situation in that instance, but in a completely different instance, it cost him his life.
Well, yeah. If anything, it shows that that his firearm is not his mechanism of expressing his discontent with law enforcement. He chooses other means. Somebody did mention prior bad acts. It can be introduced. That's actually inadmissible to prove propensity in court. You can only introduce that if it's for a non-character purpose, which wouldn't be here. If it's relevant to the disputed issue, which it wouldn't have been in the use of force against him. And then, as Cass indicated, you always have the rule of 403 catch-all that it has to be more probative than prejudicial. And here it would be extremely prejudicial with very little, if any, probative value.
So I kind of want to move on to like there have been some alarming statements from the admin, and they have kind of rolled these back a little bit since, you know, Daddy Trump gave him, you know, called him into the principal's office. But and I say that mockingly, just to be clear for the 150 people that are watching this. Anyway, so they get called into the office. But we had Kash Patel out there saying you can't be armed at a protest. We had Christine Ohm saying no peaceful protesters are armed. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about not only what Minnesota law says, but just about that in general. Is there anything barring protesters from being armed? I mean, I seem to remember lots of protesters doing this, but I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, so there's nothing in Minnesota law that says that you can't carry at a protest, a gathering. The only thing you can't do is if you are actively participating in a riot, and that means you're actively participating, not just present. That if you have a firearm, that can be a crime. So, but what some people are trying to do is somehow turn filming on the sidewalk of a arrest or ICE actions into a riot, which is in itself a riot.
That's actually a good question. Is sort of like how do they separate that out? Like if you were to go to court, right, and they're saying you're rioting, how is the court assessing that versus you just protesting and being a general nuisance, right? Like I'm curious about that.
Yeah, so the definition, you have to have two or more people who are actively engaged in kind of wanton destruction of property or assaulting of individuals. So it is a pretty low standard, but there wasn't any of that going on. So and you have to actually be an active participant in it. You can't just being present while a riot is going on. If you have a firearm, isn't itself a crime. You actually have to be participating, doing an affirmative act towards the riotous conduct.
Can we just talk for just a moment? And I heard you do this on another interview, but it really like struck home with me that our constitutional amendments are not an a la carte thing. You don't have to pick and choose which one of them you get. Would you like to elaborate on how the fact that all of your amendments, you're entitled to them simultaneously?
Yeah, absolutely. If you are a place where you're lawfully allowed to be, you're allowed to protest there. If you have a firearm with you, that's your Second Amendment right. If you have a carry permit, that's the threshold that Minnesota sets in order for you to be able to carry in public. And, you know, if you're not in any of the prohibited places that we have in statute, so courthouses or schools, daycare centers, but out on the street, you're perfectly fine. You don't have to pick between which amendment that you want to exercise. If you're acting lawfully within speech, you can lawfully carry as well.
So you mean I can exercise my First Amendment, exercise my Second Amendment, still have the Fourth Amendment backing me up, all of them at the same time?
Yep, except quartering of soldiers. That's the only one. You do have to allow them into your home if you're exercising your first. I'm just kidding.
Repeal the third.
Like, what soldier am I quartering? But okay.
I always have to do a shout out.
I just know that you're a bit of a constitutional nerd.
It does.
I know you're a bit of a constitutional nerd, so I love to throw those kind of questions at you.
So this gets brought up quite a bit. The signal chat tracking law enforcement. As far as I know, there is absolutely nothing barring that, and it's completely within your First Amendment rights to do so, i.e. a la Google speed traps that pop up anytime you're using Google Maps. Now, am I wrong, or is there something specific about this I should know?
Yeah, there's actually in the Eighth Circuit, there's a headlight case. You guys know how if there's a speed trap and you're seeing cars coming down the road, you do the little light flicker thing. There's a dude who was actually arrested for obstruction of legal process for that. And it went all the way up to the Eighth Circuit. And the Eighth Circuit basically just said the ability for people to communicate the activities of law enforcement is a First Amendment protected right. So as oddly as headlight flashing can come into this, it does set some established case law that notifying other people of law enforcement activity is protected speech. And protected speech means that you can do that. Now, if there's an individual there who's attempting to plan particular illegal actions against law enforcement, that's a different thing. But also, the entire Signal chat group isn't open to criminal prosecution for that. It would only be the individuals who are taking an affirmative act towards planning any particular illegal action. So no, this is just pure freedom of speech.
Well, and like something I've always really like loved about you, at least on TikTok Live and just your general demeanor, is you're very much an advocate for all your rights. You're very entitled to your right. Like you don't want suppression of any of them. And I know like you've been on so many platforms on here, and you know you have a very pro LGBTQIA stance. You have a very you're pro choice, all of that. And I think I'm curious about sort of, I know you do come across to people as liberal, and it tends to be very it's negative to be pro 2A sometimes in the sort of liberal spectrum. I'm curious if you want to tell us a little bit about that. Like, tell us more about who you are, like at your kind of core here.
Yeah, so unlike your constitutional rights, I do very much an a la carte of issues from kind of all political ideologies. I am very much politically homeless. I would probably be a libertarian if libertarians weren't so crazy. But also like in that sense, I think that there's a role for government. I think that providing for people's basic needs enhances their liberty. And I think that providing to a social structure only strengthens our society. If we have smarter people, our society advances better. People can experience more freedom and more liberty. Yeah, I'm like fully on board with single payer healthcare. You don't have to destroy the private insurance market, but give them a hell of a competitor so that that there's a race to compete for costs. I think the government can do it. Now, that's very challenging, unlike a lot of other European countries that have universal healthcare. We have a very large country that's widely dispersed with different population pockets. It's difficult to try to get high quality healthcare to all the population centers that we have. But that's something we can figure out. But if at least we've got a single payer insurance option that can compete with these major. So those are the things that libertarians would execute me in the street for thinking. So yeah, but also like religious liberty. I don't think any religion has any ordained position within government. I think free exercise means that your government is completely agnostic and not governed by religious principles. So yeah, I've got enough opinions to piss anybody off. So we could probably agree on 90% of things, but then I guarantee you're going to hate me on 10%, which is fine. I'm cool with that. Like, it doesn't bother me. If it bothers you, that sounds like kind of a you problem.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the thing is like we get into there's a reason this is called politically deconstructing, because it gets very frustrating when we all try to like shove each other into a box, because nobody fits neatly in a box. I think a lot of people have ideas that are all over the spectrum. I have some conservative ideas, I have some very libertarian ideas, and I have some very like socialist or very left-leaning ideas. And I don't think it needs to be an end all be all. It doesn't have to be one or the other. You can just be who you are and like be cool with that. I forgot to ask you about this and I was looking on my board. There was one other question I had specific to Minnesota gun law because it's come up so much and I cannot believe I passed this. Brandishing. What does Minnesota say about brandishing?
Not a damn thing. We have no brandishing law. We do criminalize reckless handling of a firearm, and reckless means that you need to have handle a firearm in a way that you have complete disregard for a known safety risk. And so pointing
it in a holster.
Yeah, being in a holster. We have open carry here. There's dudes who walk around with ARs slung in across their chest. It's rare, but it happens. That's perfectly legal. I also saw in the comments that Alex Preddy wasn't legally carrying. That's false. He had a legal permit to carry. The act of, we call it a forgot your wallet provision, is you don't need, you're supposed to have by the law, you're supposed to have your ID and your carry permit with you at all times. Now, if you don't have it, they will issue a citation. If you fail to provide proof of your ID or your permit card later on, then that ticket can result in a $25 fine. If you do show your ID and your permit card later on, it's dismissed. like it never happened. So our law bakes into it to have a non-criminal way, and a petty misdemeanor 25 ticket isn't even a criminal charge, but it has a non-criminal way to resolve for getting your ID or your permit. So he was not carrying illegally, because had he been asked for his permit and his ID, which nobody fucking asked him for, he may have been able to present it. It may have just been in his car across the street, and he would have been able to say, "Oh yeah, sure, here you go," and then there's no criminal action. But it's also just utterly irrelevant because, again, nobody asked him.
I kind of want to talk about a couple different things. One of the things that I found very interesting is kind of the legal muddy waters we're in right now with how we may get some kind of prosecution or investigation into this, and what legal challenges it's going to pose having the Department of Homeland Security either investigate itself or the Department of Justice investigate the Department of Homeland Security, and any legal issues you may see coming up with that.
Yeah, so starting with criminal, it's kind of the same analysis for both Alex Pardee and Renee Good, both of their unalivings. So this isn't something that the feds are interested in charging in either of them. So I don't anticipate any federal charges. Now the state can file charges against them, criminal charges. Mary Moriarty, our Hennepin County attorney, Hennepin County is the county that Minneapolis is in, has said that she has enough evidence to come to a charging decision. So at least in the Alex Pardee situation. So we may actually be able to see that come to fruition. The challenge is with both of these is that the state doesn't have access to the crime scene. The Bureau of Criminal Apprehension attempted to get into the Alex Pardee crime scene with a judicial warrant. They were denied access in the Renee Good shooting. So they showed up actually with a judicial warrant, and federal agents said no. And so when you don't have things like the weapon that was used to unalive, when you don't have the identity of key witnesses or even the suspects themselves, thankfully J.D. Vance doxed Renee Good's shooter, so we know who that is. And then if you don't have any of the evidence, they don't even have the vehicle from Renee Good's shooting. So that's, those are critical things that you need to try to build probable cause to get sustain a conviction. And they don't have access to it, so it's very difficult. But any relief on the criminal front is going to come from the state, and they're working very hard on that.
Now, can the Department of Justice step in, because they can argue that the crime was committed under the purview of a federal agent's job and federalize those charges?
Yeah, so 28 USC 1441, I think, says that any civil or criminal suit against a agent or officer of the federal government can be removed to federal court. It would still be the state prosecuting it under state law. The venue would just be the federal court. Where the DOJ would come in is they would step in to try to intervene to assert supremacy clause immunity, that the state can't prosecute this because it's the sole purview of the federal government. And that argument would be up before a judge. That argument was made. There was a sniper over in Ruby Ridge that happened back in the 90s over in what was it, Idaho, Montana? Slipping my mind right now.
I think it's Idaho.
Yeah, I think I
can't weigh in on that.
Yeah, and so the state actually brought manslaughter charges against that agent, and it went all the way up to the Ninth Circuit. And the Ninth Circuit said, nope, there's at least a question that he was acting outside of his lawful authority, so the supremacy clause immunity doesn't apply. So there is precedent to say that that even though it will get removed to federal court and the DOJ will try to step in, that's not a guaranteed slam dunk that the case goes away.
I will say, though, in Ruby Ridge, what Weaver was successful with was this civil, like going after them civilly, correct? If I remember that correctly. Yeah.
Are there any legal remedies if the Department of Justice is perceived as compromised or unwilling to pursue an impartial civil rights inquiry?
Not really. Those are political questions that the court doesn't get involved in. The court only answers legal questions if an executive isn't doing what they're charged with doing. That's not a clear violation of the law. It can be argued that it's office discretion. Those are the things that courts are very reluctant to step into.
Well, and that's kind of sort of like the problem we're in. I've tried to explain this before, and I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly, is that like the exact agency that is charged with enforcing the law I don't know. You can certainly try to compel them to do so, but you're kind of like asking them to check themselves. And if you've got some, and I'll say it, this is my perspective, right? If you've got some sort of corruption at the top, it's going to be very hard to get any relief. Am I phrasing that correctly, Law? Like, I don't
Well,
know.
yeah, I mean, as far as like all of the DOJ prosecutors, there are puppet strings attached. They are following orders from their puppeteers. So whether it's Pam Bondi or Donald Trump, they're going to do what they're told. And we've already seen what happens when they don't want to do what they're told, with the mass exodus of 7 attorneys from the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Minnesota, including Joe Thompson, who I know personally and is a man of high integrity, who the right was loving a month ago,
Yeah,
or 2 months ago, I guess now, when he was uncovering all of the fraud in Minnesota, and saying that there was $9 billion of fraud. Everybody loved him. But now, because he resigned, because he refused to try to demonize and look into criminal activities of Renee Good's spouse, and stall the investigation, and that the administration overturned his decision to allow the BCA into the investigation, and he resigned. Now he's corrupt and was bought off and paid for, or whatever. Not that just he has principles and ethics that he feels like he needs to abide by.
I think I'm going to ask the same question just in a different way, just to make sure that I'm getting clarification. And I'm sorry, Law, if I'm irritating you. I love you. Thank you for putting up with me. If the DOJ declines to prosecute, are there any like official complaints or oversight mechanisms that are available, like an inspector general or Congress or a special prosecutor?
I'm going to disappoint you. I'm sorry. The DOJ's prosecutorial authority, they are given pretty much sole discretion about the cases that they decide to charge or not charge. Now, the civil side is another interesting side that we didn't touch on. Civilly, there is a path to try and sue a agent personally. It's kind of if it was a state actor, if it was a cop or a sheriff or whatever, you could do a 1983 claim, which is suing a state actor for violations of constitutional rights. There's a similar action that applies to federal agents. It's called a Bivens action, but the court has spent the last decade very, incredibly narrowing Bivens. The joke among lawyers, which Cass knows, is unless your name is Webster Bivens, you're never going to succeed on a Bivens claim. That's just how narrowly they've applied it. So that's not a realistic avenue of relief, but there is something called the Federal Tort Claims Act, where you're actually suing the federal government itself for wrongful unaliving or for deprivation of rights. And that is a extremely expensive battle, because the government, for every $1 you spend on litigation, the government can spend $10 million. They don't care. But if you have an organization or attorneys behind you that are footing the bill to try to get justice, it is very viable that something like the ACLU or the Advocates for Human Rights or the Institute for Justice, if they're working on this and they're committed to it, they may be able to get some relief through the Federal Tort Claims Act.
You think if a new administration comes in, right? Like, obviously, I think that's very likely to happen after this one. That some of the sort of restraint being shown right now, especially in the disclosure of evidence, and I know we're talking about civil, and I love that as well. But do you think some of that restraint on the state having access may loosen, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, depending on the crime that they're seeking to prosecute, there may not be a statute of limitations. That if another organization and another administration decides to open up the investigation and the evidence, that may very well get charges later on. But also there can be civil remedies, like Ashley Babbitt's family attempted to sue the federal government for wrongful unaliving, and their case got stalled out. But then after Donald Trump got elected, he invited them to sue the government again, and then engaged in a $5 million settlement for her family. There are remedies that a new administration can give, both criminally and financially.
One thing I wanted to follow up on, I was in the Warrenberger building over the other day in St. Paul, listening to the BCA try to get the federal government to basically not destroy or alter evidence. I don't know, we haven't had a decision on that yet. I'm curious if you had any thoughts on the matter. How do you think it might go for them?
The judge seemed, at least from what I hear from you and other reporters, very skeptical that the federal government's argument of, well, yeah, we're not going to destroy it now. We can't tell you when, but but at least for now we won't, is going to be sufficient. And I think that's important. I think the federal government fighting in order to preserve evidence is alarming. I think they should just come back. If they would have just come back and said our evidence retention timeline is 20 years, and after that it's going to be destroyed. So we're not going to do anything out of policy with it for the next 20 years. I think it would have been a very short hearing and denial of the order. But the fact that they couldn't even be specific about what their own retention guidelines were was pretty alarming.
That was the most alarming part to me through the whole thing. Is it was a lot of I don't know, and like, bro, that's your job. You know you're coming in here and you're likely that is the most likely question that you're going to be answering is like, well, how long are you going to keep this? How long are you going to do XYZ? I couldn't understand for the life of me why we were getting I don't knows for those sort of basic questions.
I had a question for Law when we were discussing, and this is, a real layman question. Does qualified immunity factor in for any of the civil stuff we were talking about? Like, how is that? I want your take on like how qualified immunity may come into play.
Yeah, for civil cases, qualified immunity would be part of the analysis about, basically it says that if an officer violates your rights, but that right wasn't clearly established, that the officer, kind of gets a free pass. Here, the right to not be unalived is pretty clearly established. So I don't think supremacy clause immunity is where the fight's going to be at. I don't think qualified immunity is going to have much of an impact.
You have done a lot of interviews, as we talked about, and I'm just wondering, like, of all the questions that you've been asked and everything that has been brought up, is there anything that you haven't gotten to talk about or anything that you felt was pertinent that you haven't been asked about yet?
That's a good question that I didn't think about. People have been pretty comprehensive in their analysis. I think we should do another whole one of these on immigration law, because that's I feel like
I would love that.
That the immigration nexus to this is pretty shocking. Just because in this instance we were talking about somebody who had an allegation and it was a 5-year-old case that he pled to, and it received a stay of imposition. So he had probation and it was over. So the person who they were looking for when they shot Alex Preddy. So he had already gone through treatment, already reconciled with his spouse, but he had this conviction on him. And the actions that were not even actual physical contact. It was he threw something towards her, but that was enough to satisfy the elements for the crime of domestic assault. If you actually inflict or attempt to inflict harm on somebody, then that satisfies it. So this is the thing that cost Alex Preddy his life, is he was trying to film this arrest operation over a 5-year-old crime that is long since actually what is that? That's even more than that right now. No, that's 7 years. Yeah, if 2018. So
that's 7 years.
7 years, yeah. 7-year-old crime that pretty much everybody has forgotten about is why he lost his life. And I think that when we're looking at the operations, is the juice worth the squeeze? I mean, is this the cost that we're willing to pay for rounding up people who pose no active threat, who maybe had a criminal charge like many Minnesotans do, that's long since been resolved? The court's been satisfied, the public safety has been satisfied, even the alleged victim has been satisfied, and yet that's what cost him his life. I think we really need to reevaluate our priorities.
So what I heard is you're going to come back and we're going to talk about immigration.
That sounds like fun.
I'm honestly down. We can certainly set that up and plan it, because we will plan around your schedule. We usually try to do 11 on Mondays and Fridays, but I know that can be rough with what you've got going on, and you're very busy guys. So we'll work around that.
Episode coming up.
Yeah, I'll have my people talk to your people.
Yes, we'll have our people chat.
Ironically, both of our peoples are Cass, so.
I know, yeah.
So
Can I just really tell you thank you so much for giving us so much of your time today. I appreciate it so much, and I always value what you have to say.
My pleasure. You guys have a good day.
Absolutely. Thank you, Bestie. And guys, we are going to wrap. We appreciate each and every one of you so much for being here. We want to see more of Law. He certainly does. If you can send a like, follow, DM, and you better have followed Law if you weren't following, or else I'm going to be upset with you. Because he's great. He came on here and gave us a lot of good information. But this is Politically Deconstructing with Googs and Cass. Googs, any final thoughts?
It was a lot, right? Like, we covered so much of the legal aspect of what happened. And I hope that everybody listening really got something out of this, because this was not meant to be partisan. This was meant strictly as like fact finding and open discussion about what's going on right now.
I think that's all I got today. I mean, Law
Yeah,
gave us
no,
so
I
much
think
good
that was
info, so.
I think that was great.
All
Like,
right.
thank you everybody that stuck around, and thanks Cass as always. Thank you again, Law, and have a great day,
All
everybody.
right. Bye, guys.